I walked out into the rain with a single suitcase and a marriage that had already died inside that house. I expected silence, but a black luxury car slid in to block my exit. The stranger who stepped out didn't offer a tissue. Instead, he handed me a check for $75 million and whispered a command that chilled my blood. Don't divorce. Not yet. I thought I was free, but the real game was just beginning. My name is Mariah Dalton. At 38 years old, I had become an expert at making myself small so my husband could feel large. 10 years ago, I was a rising interior designer with a chaotic, colorful portfolio and a life that belonged to me. Now, I was just the hidden architecture that held up Miles Dalton, the star surgeon of Ashford Medical Center. I was the silent foundation he stood on to reach the stars, and foundations are not meant to be seen. The night of the Clinician of the Year Gala was the culmination of a decade of my invisible labor. I stood in the foyer of the house I had designed, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo. Miles looked at his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his tie with a surgical precision that used to impress me but now just looked like vanity. "Do I look ready?" he asked, not meeting my eyes. "You look perfect, Miles. They're going to love you," I said. He hummed a response that wasn't quite a word and checked his phone for the third time in 5 minutes. Grandmother Evelyn took a turn. I need to keep this on. At the gala, I played my role. I smiled until my jaw ached. I laughed at jokes I had heard a dozen times from department heads who looked at my chest rather than my face. When Miles took the stage, the applause was thunderous. He stood there, bathing in the light, clutching his award. "I want to thank the board for their trust," Miles said, his voice projecting warmth that never reached our home. "To my mentors, who guided my hands. To my incredible team at Ashford, who make miracles happen every day. And to my grandmother, Evelyn Dalton, who taught me that legacy is everything." He smiled at the crowd. He smiled at the cameras. He did not look at table 4, where I sat alone. He thanked everyone in the room except the woman who had proofread his research papers until 2 in the morning and ironed the shirt he was wearing. The omission was subtle, a small knife slip that only I felt, but I saw a few wives at the next table exchange glances. They saw the crack in the porcelain. The ride home was suffocating. Miles drove the luxury sedan with one hand, the other gripping his phone. "I need to stop by the office," he said abruptly, turning the car toward the hospital. "Just for a second. I left the grand rounds file. It's midnight." "Miles," I said softly. "It's important." "Mariah." God. "Don't start." He left me in the car for 20 minutes. His phone, which he had left in the center console, buzzed incessantly. I didn't look at it. I didn't have to. I had learned to swallow the bile of suspicion so many times that it tasted like water. When we finally returned to our driveway, the house was dark, but the air inside felt heavy, charged with a static I recognized too late. Miles went upstairs while I locked the front door. I intended to go to the guest room to avoid the cold emanating from him, but then I heard it. Laughter. It was a woman's laugh, low and throaty, coming from behind the master bedroom door. It wasn't the sound of a TV. It was the sound of intimacy. I walked up the stairs, my heels silent on the carpet. I pushed the door open. Miles was not looking for a file. He was sitting on the edge of our bed, his tie undone, and standing between his knees was Bryn Harrow. I knew her. Everyone knew her. She was the top pharmaceutical representative in the state, a woman who wore ambition like a second skin. She looked up at me, her hand still resting on Miles's shoulder, and she didn't flinch. She didn't scramble to cover up. She looked at me like I was a maid who had entered without knocking. "You're home early," I whispered, the absurdity of the statement hanging in the air. Miles stood up, running a hand through his hair. He looked annoyed rather than guilty. "Mariah, look, we can talk about this in the morning." "She's still here?" Bryn asked. looking at Miles and ignoring me completely. She turned her gaze to me, her eyes sweeping over my dress with disdain. You know, Miles always said you were dutiful. But, God, you're even more boring in person. You just don't get it. Do you? You don't understand a man like him. I looked at my husband. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to tell her to get out. Bryn, please. Not now, Miles said, his voice weak. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to maintain the status quo. Mariah, you're tired. You're emotional. Just go to the guest room. We'll fix this tomorrow. Don't make this a big thing. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my interior design career dying all over again. It was the sound of 10 years of wasted loyalty. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I turned around and walked to the closet. I took down the small overnight suitcase. "What are you doing?" Miles asked, a hint of panic finally entering his voice. "I'm done." "Miles," I said. "You're being dramatic," Bryn scoffed. I zipped the bag. I walked past them, down the stairs and out the front door into the pouring rain. The water soaked through my gala dress instantly, chilling me to the bone, but it felt cleaner than the air inside that house. I was walking away from the masterpiece I had built for him, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't acting. I reached for the door handle of my car, my fingers slipping on the wet metal, when a pair of blinding lead headlights cut through the darkness. A black, lucid air glided silently across the driveway, blocking my exit with aggressive precision. It felt less like a rescue and more like an ambush. The rear window rolled down, and a face I recognized from the covers of Forbes and Fortune peered out. Graham Harrow. He was older than his wife, Bryn, with silver hair and eyes that looked like they had been carved out of flint. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer me an umbrella. He simply opened the door and tossed a thick leather portfolio onto the wet pavement at my feet. "Pick it up," Graham said, his voice barely rising above the sound of the rain. I stared at him, shivering. "Get out of my way." "Graham." "Open it." "Mariah," he commanded. Driven by a mix of confusion and adrenaline, I crouched down and grabbed the leather folder. I shielded it with my body as I flipped it open. Inside, clipped to a stack of legal documents, was a cashier's check. My eyes struggled to focus on the numbers in the dim light, but the zeros were unmistakable. It was made out to me. $75 million. I looked up at him, the rain plastering my hair to my face. Is this hush money? You think you can buy my silence because your wife is sleeping with my husband." "It is a retainer," Graham said, his tone devoid of emotion. "And the condition is simple. Do not divorce him." "Not yet." "You're insane," I spat, making to throw the portfolio back at him. "I'm leaving him. Tonight." "If you leave tonight, you lose," Graham said, his voice cutting like a whip. "And they win. You think this is just about sex? You think Miles is just bored?" He leaned forward, his face coming into the light. "They are robbing you blind, Mariah, and they are robbing me." I froze. "What are you talking about? Miles and Bryn aren't just fumbling around in your bedsheets," Graham explained, speaking with the rapid-fire delivery of a man running a boardroom meeting. "They are siphoning capital. Fake vendor invoices at the hospital, diverted research grants, shell accounts in the Caymans. They have been moving money for 6 months. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Miles was obsessed with his image. He wouldn't risk his license for theft. He wouldn't, I whispered. "He is," Graham countered. "And the endgame isn't the hospital money. It's your grandmother-in-law." "Evelyn." My stomach turned over. "Evelyn Bryn has been positioning herself to gain power of attorney," Graham said. "They are targeting the Dalton family trust. They are waiting for the old woman to die or become incapacitated so they can drain the main vault." It is a two-pronged attack. Love and money." He pointed a finger at the house, where the lights were still warm and inviting, masking the rot inside. "If you file for divorce tomorrow," Graham continued, "Miles will know he has been caught. He will liquidate the accounts, shred the paper trail, and Bryn will disappear. They will walk away with millions, and you will get a pitiable settlement and a broken heart. I cannot let that happen. So, what do you want?" I asked, clutching the wet leather against my chest. 120 days, Graham said. "I need you to go back inside. Wipe your face. Lie to him. Tell him you overreacted. Act like the dutiful wife you have been for a decade. Keep him calm while my forensic accountants build the criminal case." "You want me to sleep in the same house with him knowing what I know I am buying your acting skills?" "Mariah," Graham said coldly, "that check is your salary. There is another $5 million as a completion bonus if we get a conviction." "I am not buying your affection. I am buying time." I looked at the check again. $75 million. It was more money than Miles would make in 10 lifetimes. It was freedom. It was a weapon. "Why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why don't you just expose them now?" "Because Miles thinks you are weak," Graham said, and for the first time, his expression softened into something resembling pity, though it was likely just strategy. "He thinks you will just cry and run away. He expects you to fold. I need you to stand up. I need you to be the one thing he never saw coming." I looked back at the house. I imagined Miles upstairs, probably pouring a drink, telling Bryn that I would be back in an hour, begging for forgiveness. He thought I was furniture. He thought I was a prop in his movie. I turned back to Graham. The rain didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like fuel. 120 days, I repeated. "Do we have a deal?" Graham asked. I didn't say a word. I pulled a pen from the portfolio, used the roof of his car as a desk, and signed the agreement. I wasn't just signing a contract. I was signing a declaration of war. "Good," Graham said, the window rolling up. "Now go inside and put on a show." The lucid air reversed and vanished into the storm. I took a deep breath, gripped the handle of my suitcase, and turned back toward the front door. I wasn't Mariah the victim anymore. I was the mole, and I was going to burn Miles Dalton to the ground. The walk back up the driveway was the longest journey of my life. My clothes were heavy with rain, but the check in my pocket felt heavier, like a lead weight dragging me down into a dark ocean. When I opened the front door, Miles was standing in the foyer, phone in hand, looking like a man trying to calculate the blast radius of a bomb. "Mariah," he breathed out, stepping forward. "Thank God." "I thought you—" "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice flat, stripping away any warmth he might have hoped for. "But things are going to change. Tonight." I laid out the terms of my surrender, which was actually the terms of his entrapment. He would sleep in the guest room. We would start marriage counseling immediately. I wanted full transparency on our joint accounts. "Yes," Miles said, nodding too quickly, his eyes wide with a desperate sort of relief. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need. I want to fix this." He agreed so fast it made my skin crawl. There was no negotiation, no pride, just the frantic compliance of a man who needed to keep his cover story intact. He wasn't fighting for me. He was fighting to keep his access to the Dalton name. The next morning, I received a package at a rented post office box I had set up years ago for a freelance project. It contained a burner phone and a black moleskin notebook from Graham's lawyer. The instructions were simple: write down every lie, date, time, and content, by noon. I had filled 3 pages. Miles began his performance of the penitent husband. He brought home a bouquet of cheap supermarket carnations flowers he knew I hated and presented them like a peace offering. He burned toast in the kitchen and called it breakfast in bed. "I just want to show you I'm trying," he said, giving me a puppy dog look that used to melt me. "Now," I just saw the calculation behind it. He was building a paper trail of reconciliation in case this went to court. 2 days later, we went to see his grandmother, Evelyn, at the hospice center. The hallway smelled of lemon antiseptic and dying flowers. Miles held my hand as we walked past the nurse's station, greeting the staff with his dazzling, award-winning smile. "She's in good spirits today," he told the head nurse, his voice dripping with concern. "We're just so blessed to have this time with her." But the moment we stepped away, his face dropped. He pulled out his phone, checking messages while I walked ahead toward room 304. I paused near the water fountain when I realized he wasn't following me. He had ducked into a small alcove. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. "It's taking too long," Miles hissed into the phone. "She's just lying there." "No, I can't push the doctor yet. We have to deal with this senile old woman. She's a roadblock. Bryn," my breath hitched. Deal with this senile old woman. That was how he saw the woman who raised him as a roadblock to a payout. I composed myself and walked into the room just as he hung up. We sat by Evelyn's bed. She was frail, her skin like parchment paper, but her eyes were sharp. She looked at Miles, then at me, and I saw a flicker of confusion, or perhaps suspicion, in her gaze. When we left an hour later, the nightmare continued in the parking lot. As we walked to our car, a familiar figure stepped out from behind a pillar. Bryn. She was wearing a tailored suit, looking every inch the professional pharmaceutical rep, not the woman I had found in my bed. "Miles, Dr. Dalton," she said, her voice smooth and professional, though her eyes locked onto mine with a predator's gleam. "And Mrs. Dalton, good to see you." "Bryn," Miles said, stiffening. "Just checking on some accounts at the hospital," she said, but her eyes darted past us, up toward the window of room 304. She wasn't looking at the hospital. She was appraising the asset. "I hope your grandmother is comfortable." "She's fine," I said, cutting in. Bryn smiled, a tight, thin expression. "Good. We all want what's best for the family." That night, on the secure phone, Graham sent me a file. It was a forensic accounting of our finances. I scrolled through the PDF, my heart hammering against my ribs. There were hundreds of small transfers under $5,000 each to avoid flagging going to shell companies with names like Apex Consulting and Harrow Logistics. But the last page made me gasp. He took out a second mortgage. I whispered to the empty room. Miles had forged my signature on a home equity line of credit. He wasn't just stealing from the hospital or the trust. He was leveraging the roof over my head to fund his escape plan with Bryn. I heard Miles coming up the stairs. I hid the phone under the mattress and sat up, smoothing my expression into a mask of weary forgiveness. I had to be the wife he expected, the doormat. Miles stood in the doorway, looking tentative. "Can I get you anything?" "Mariah." I looked at him, forcing a soft, sad smile. "No, Miles, but I was thinking about Evelyn." "You're so busy with the hospital, and this stress is too much for you. Let me take over her daily care coordination. I want to help." Miles blinked, surprised. Then, a look of relief washed over him, not gratitude, but the relief of a general who just got a volunteer for the front lines. He thought he was delegating a chore. He didn't realize he was handing me the keys to his undoing. "That would be amazing, honey," he said. "You're a saint." "I know," I said. "I'm doing it for us." The handoff happened in the pasta aisle of a local organic market, between the artisanal marinara and the gluten-free linguine. I was pretending to read a nutrition label when a man in a gray hoodie brushed past me. He didn't look like a spy. He looked like a suburban dad picking up dinner. "Top pocket of your purse," he murmured without breaking stride. "Don't use it until he is deep in REM sleep." I didn't look at him. I reached into my bag and felt a small, cold rectangle, no larger than a credit card reader. It was terrifyingly simple. It was a data extractor, a tool of espionage sitting right next to my wallet and my lipstick. That night, the silence in the bedroom was deafening. Miles was asleep, his breathing heavy and rhythmic, the sleep of a man who thought he had successfully pacified his world. I lay awake, watching the red digits of the alarm clock change. 2 a.m. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached for his phone on the nightstand. My hand trembled. If he woke up, if he saw me, I pushed the thought away. I plugged the small device into the charging port of his phone. The screen lit up with a faint blue glow. A progress bar appeared. 20%. Miles shifted, groaning softly. I froze, my hand hovering over the device, ready to rip it out and hide it under the pillow. He didn't wake up. He just rolled over, turning his back to me. 60%. Come on, I mouthed silently. 100%. A soft chirp, barely audible, signaled the end. I pulled the device out, slid his phone back exactly where it had been, and slipped out of the room to the bathroom. I locked the door and plugged the extractor into the burner phone Graham had given me. The data flooded the screen, a digital autopsy of my husband's betrayal. It wasn't just an affair, it was an exit strategy. I scrolled through a thread from earlier that day. 120 days. Miles had written, "That is the timeline. We cash out the equities, get the old lady to sign the power of attorney, and then we disappear. I am looking at properties in Portugal. What about her?" Bryn had replied. I held my breath as I read his response. Mariah. She is just indoor furniture. Babe. She is decorative. She sits where I put her and she doesn't make noise. Once we have the money, I will leave the house to the bank and the furniture behind. Furniture. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I didn't see a woman. I saw a chair, a lamp, something to be used and discarded. A cold fury settled in my chest, replacing the fear. The next morning, I spoke to Graham on the secure line while Miles was in the shower. "It is worse than we thought," Graham said, his voice grim. "My team analyzed the preliminary data. Bryn is processing fake vendor contracts through my logistics company, channeling money to offshore accounts. Miles is doing the same at Ashford. He is manipulating hospital protocols to order expensive, unnecessary equipment from these shell companies. They are bleeding us dry. There is something else," I said, looking at the calendar on the wall. I saw an appointment on his digital calendar for next Tuesday. It just says family lawyer. It is scheduled for 2 p.m. That is right after Evelyn's heavy medication dose, Graham noted sharply. They are going to try to get her to sign the power of attorney while she is lucid enough to hold a pen but too drugged to read the fine print. I hung up and went downstairs. I couldn't just be a spy. I had to be a survivor. I opened my laptop and logged into my old design accounts. I reached out to a friend from college who ran a boutique firm in the city, asking about freelance work under my maiden name. I signed up for a refresher course on modern architectural software. I was building a life raft. If the ship went down, I wasn't going to drown with the captain. Later that afternoon, while putting away Miles's laundry, I opened the bottom drawer of his bedside table, the one he thought I never touched because it was full of old medical journals. Tucked between 2 magazines was a draft of a legal document. It was a beneficiary designation form for a life insurance policy I didn't know existed. In the space for primary beneficiary, my name had been crossed out in red ink. Next to it, in Miles's handwriting, was a new name, Bryn Harrow. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Graham. "Be careful. Mariah. They do not just want to leave. They want to leave you with the debt. And they are trying to push Evelyn out of the way permanently. If that power of attorney gets signed, your grandmother-in-law is a dead woman walking." I closed the drawer. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity anymore. I was fighting for a life. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I had to do. The furniture was about to start moving on its own. I began to haunt the corridors of the hospice center like a specter. I spent every afternoon sitting by Evelyn's bedside, reading magazines I didn't absorb and watching the rise and fall of her chest. She was weak, her skin translucent against the white sheets, but her eyes were alert. They darted around the room, settling on me with a fierce, desperate intelligence. She looked like a woman screaming behind a wall of silence. One Tuesday, the head nurse stopped me near the nurse's station. She looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "Mrs. Dalton," she said, "I just wanted to double-check the directive regarding the visitor list. The request to add Ms. Harrow came through yesterday, but the note about granting her medical proxy review access seemed unusual for a non-relative. The air left my lungs. Ms. Harrow." "Yes," the nurse said. "Your husband sent the memo. He said she is a family consultant. That night, over a dinner of takeout Thai food that tasted like cardboard, I decided to pull the thread." "Miles," I said, keeping my voice light. "The picture of a concerned wife. The nurse mentioned something odd today. She said there was a request to give Bryn Harrow access to Evelyn's medical files. Is she working with the hospital now?" Miles didn't look up from his phone. He continued scrolling, his thumb moving in a rhythmic, dismissive motion. "It is just administrative." "Mariah," he said, his tone bored. "Bryn is helping coordinate some billing issues with the pharmaceutical suppliers. It is efficient, but medical proxy access I pressed." He slammed his phone down on the table. The sudden noise made me jump, a reaction I didn't have to fake. God! "You are always looking for conspiracies," he snapped, shaking his head. "You are being paranoid again." "It is embarrassing. Mariah, you see shadows everywhere because you are unhappy with yourself. Stop trying to micromanage my job. Do you even hear how crazy you sound?" He was gaslighting me with the ease of a man who had done it 1,000 times. He wanted me to feel small, crazy, and doubting of my own reality. I lowered my eyes, playing the part. "I am sorry. Miles. I worry." I reported everything to Graham immediately. His legal team set up a parallel monitoring system at the county clerk's office to flag any filings related to the Dalton estate. We were watching the watchers. 2 days later, Miles announced his trip. "I have a conference in Napa Valley this weekend," he said, pulling a leather weekender bag from the closet. "Innovations in cardiology. It is a big deal." I knew exactly what it was. It was a test run for their new life. A weekend of wine tasting and forgery meetings. "I should come with you," I said, stepping in front of him. I reached out and touched his arm, forcing a smile. "We could use the time away." "Miles. To heal. To reconnect." For a split second, the mask slipped. Panic flashed in his eyes. He actually took a half step back, as if my touch burned. No, that wouldn't work," he stammered, then quickly recovered his composure. "It is strictly business, honey. Boring lectures, endless round tables. You would be miserable. Stay here. Take care of the house." He needed the darkness. He needed the space to maneuver. Graham sent me a new financial map that evening. It showed the Dalton Family Hope Fund, a small charity account, being drained in increments of $9,000. "They are clearing the decks," Graham told me. "They need to legitimize one massive final withdrawal." I decided to set a trap to confirm his motivation. When Miles returned from work, I met him at the door. "I have been thinking about the medical bills," I said softly. "I know the insurance covers a lot, but the private room is expensive. I could sell my mother's vintage jewelry, and the diamond earrings you gave me for our 5th anniversary. To help the family." Miles stopped. He looked at me, and I saw the greed flare in his pupils. He didn't see a sacrifice. He saw cash. That is a very noble idea. "Mariah," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We should get them appraised, immediately. Every bit helps." He was willing to strip me bare before he discarded me. The next afternoon, I was back at the hospice. The room was dim. I was adjusting the blanket over Evelyn's frail legs when her hand shot out and gripped my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by adrenaline and fear. I leaned in close, my ear hovering inches from her lips. "Evelyn," I whispered. She pulled me down, her breath rattling in her chest. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide with terror. "Don't trust the one caring for me." She wheezed, the words barely forming. "I never signed. I never signed." I sat in the back of Graham's Lucid Air, parked in the shadows of a deserted industrial park. The rain had stopped, but the air inside the car was stifling. Graham handed me a tablet, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the screen. "You need to see this," Graham said. We pulled security logs and guest lists from the Dalton family archives. This is from the Children's Hospital Charity Ball, 12 years ago. I looked at the grainy footage. It showed the ballroom of the old Ritz-Carlton. In the background, near the entrance, a young Miles stood watching the crowd. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was looking at a young woman arranging centerpieces at table 9. "Me? I didn't know him then," I whispered, a chill running down my spine. We met 3 months later, at a coffee shop on 4th Street. He spilled his latte on my sketchbook. It was an accident. It was a script," Graham corrected, swiping the screen. "Miles didn't stumble into your life. Mariah, he hunted you. Look at the notes." He opened a digital folder recovered from an old hard drive. It was a dossier. There were photos of me working at the interior design showroom. There were notes about my schedule, my route to work, and most devastatingly, a section titled Target Viability. Under that heading, Miles had written, "Subject has high trust access to Evelyn Dalton. Grandmother favors her design aesthetic. Subject is emotionally pliable. Perfect entry point." I felt like I was going to throw up. The memories I had cherished for over a decade, the clumsy first meeting, the shy smiles, the way he pursued me, it was all a lie. I wasn't the love of his life. I was the key to the vault. He had married me because I was the only person who could get him past the gatekeepers of the Dalton fortune. He didn't want a wife, I said, my voice trembling. He wanted a Trojan horse. Graham nodded grimly. And Bryn did the same to me. "Look at this." He showed me another file. It was a genealogy search Bryn had run 5 years ago. She had mapped out the Dalton family tree, highlighting Evelyn's name in yellow. Next to it was a checklist: join charity board, attend gala, befriend Miles Dalton, isolate the wife. "We were not chosen for who we are," Graham said, his voice dropping to a gravelly low. "We were chosen for what we could provide. I was the bankroll. You were the access. They do not know how to love. Mariah. They only know how to invest and divest." I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. For weeks, I had been asking myself why I wasn't enough, why I was too boring, too plain, too much like furniture. But that was the wrong question. I was exactly what he wanted: sturdy, silent, and useful. The pain in my chest didn't disappear, but it changed. It hardened. It turned from the soft ache of heartbreak into the cold, heavy weight of a weapon. "I am done crying," I said. "How do we end this?" Graham took the tablet back. "We have to stop looking at this as a divorce case. This is a hostage situation, and the hostage is Evelyn. He is meeting a lawyer on Tuesday," I said. The calendar entry. My team identified him. Graham replied, "His name is Marcus Vane. He lost his license in Florida for elder fraud and reinstated it here under a loophole. He specializes in contesting wills and forcing emergency powers of attorney. Miles isn't going to that meeting to ask for legal advice. He is going to pick up a forged document." I realized then that the timeline had shifted. We didn't have 120 days. If Evelyn died, or if her health declined enough for a judge to deem her incompetent, That forged paper would become the law. Miles would control her ventilators, her heart medication, and the $200 million in the trust. If she dies before we expose him, I said, the realization landing like a physical blow, he wins. He buries her. He buries the truth. And he takes the money. Exactly, Graham said. He is counting on her silence. He calls her a senile old woman because he needs everyone else to believe she has gone mentally. But you said she spoke to you. She did. I confirmed. She knows. Graham unlocked the car doors. Then you have to keep her alive. Mariah. And you have to keep her talking. Because right now, she is the only witness who matters. I stepped out of the car. The city lights flickered in the distance, indifferent to the war being waged in the shadows. I wasn't just a scorned wife anymore. I was the guardian at the gate, and I was done letting the wolves in. While Miles and Bryn were in Napa Valley, ostensibly sipping Cabernet and discussing cardiology, they were actually leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs so bright they could be seen from space. Graham's team was intercepting everything. We had copies of the hotel receipts charged to a shell company, surveillance photos of them meeting a disbarred notary in a parking lot, and encrypted voice memos where they practiced their forgery techniques. They were drunk on their own cleverness. Back home. The war came to my doorstep. I received an urgent summons to Ashford Medical Center for a meeting regarding the care protocol evolution for Evelyn. It was a sterile corporate ambush. I walked into the conference room to find 2 hospital administrators and a lawyer I had never seen before. They smiled with too many teeth. "Mrs. Dalton, please, have a seat," the lawyer said, sliding a thick stack of papers across the mahogany table. "We need to update the care directives to match the new insurance coding. It is just standard procedure." I slipped my hand into my purse and tapped the screen of the burner phone, activating the recording app. "Of course," I said, widening my eyes to look overwhelmed. I want to make sure I understand everything before Miles gets back. I asked questions about every paragraph. I forced them to explain the jargon until their smiles began to crack. Then, I turned to the final page. It was a retroactive care proxy form, dated 3 days ago. At the bottom was Evelyn's signature. I stared at it. The ink looked confident, the loops of the letters smooth. But Evelyn had developed a tremor in her right hand 6 months ago. She couldn't hold a spoon without shaking, let alone sign her name with such calligraphic perfection. "She signed this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "On Tuesday. Yes, she was having a very lucid morning." The administrator lied smoothly. "I see," I said. "I will need a copy for our files." I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I took the copy and walked out, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was a forgery. And now, I had the proof. I went straight to Evelyn's room. The nurses were changing shifts, so I had a rare window of privacy. Evelyn was awake, her breathing shallow. When she saw me, her eyes locked onto mine with a fierce intensity. She raised a shaking hand and pointed toward the small bedside cabinet where she kept her rosary and reading glasses. "The box," she wheezed. I opened the drawer and found a small velvet jewelry box. Inside, tucked under a lining, was a brass key and a scrap of paper with spidery handwriting, "Basement. Archives." "Get it," she whispered, squeezing my hand so hard her knuckles turned white. "Before he does." I called Graham's team. That evening, while the house was empty, we went down to the climate-controlled basement storage room Miles kept locked. The brass key fit the hidden safe behind the wine rack perfectly. Inside. We didn't find money. We found a digital voice recorder and a handwritten ledger. We played the recording. It was dated 2 years ago. Evelyn's voice, strong and clear, filled the room. If you are listening to this, then Miles has made his move. I do not trust him. He looks at me like an accountant looks at a ledger. If I am incapacitated, do not let him or that woman, Bryn, near my trust. They are wolves, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. She had known. She had been waiting for someone to find this. My phone buzzed. It was Graham. "We have them," Graham said, his voice grim but satisfied. "Bryn just requested an expedited transfer of $500,000 for medical technology investment. I am going to authorize it. Once that money hits her account, it is grand larceny and wire fraud. We are locking the cage door." But the game wasn't over. Miles was getting nervous. A text message popped up on my personal phone from him. "Hey, honey, thinking about us. Maybe we should stop forcing this. A clean break might be better for everyone. Let's talk about an amicable divorce when I get back. I will make sure you are taken care of." He was panicking. He wanted to cut me loose before the crime was consummated, to remove me as a liability. He was trying to break the 120-day agreement because he sensed the walls closing in. I typed my reply slowly, my fingers steady. "I am not going anywhere. Miles. I promised Evelyn I would stay until she is better. I am devoted to this family. We can talk when you get home." I hit send. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was the anchor he couldn't lift, the weight that was going to drag him down to the bottom. The scent hit me first. It was a cloying, expensive tuberose perfume that filled the foyer before she even stepped inside. Bryn came back from Napa earlier than expected, standing on my doorstep with a ribbon-wrapped box and a smile that didn't reach her predatory eyes. She didn't wait for an invitation. She breezed past me into the living room, treating my home like a showroom she had already purchased. "I brought you a little something from the vineyard," Bryn said, placing the box on the coffee table. "Miles is just so worried about you. Mariah, we both are. It must be hard, being here all day with nothing to do but watch an old woman fade away." I looked at her, feeling a cold knot of revulsion in my stomach. "I am managing. Bryn, Evelyn is family." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Family is such a flexible concept, isn't it? But you surely understand that inheritance is a matter of worthiness. Some people build the legacy, and some just sit on the furniture." She left 10 minutes later, leaving the air heavy with her scent and her threat. But the real attack came 3 hours later. Blue and red lights flashed against the living room curtains. I opened the door to find 2 uniformed officers and a detective holding a warrant. "Mariah Dalton," the detective asked. "We received an anonymous tip regarding the embezzlement of funds from the Dalton Family Trust. We need to see your personal banking records." For a moment, the old Mariah wanted to faint. They were framing me. They were planting the theft on me so that when the money vanished, I would be the one in handcuffs. But Graham had seen this move on the chessboard before they even touched the piece. I stepped back and let them in. "Call my lawyer." Graham arrived within 20 minutes. Not with a defense, but with a binder. He had anticipated that Miles would try to use my freelance accounts as a dump site for the stolen funds. Graham had set up a mirror account, a bait account that looked like mine but was fully monitored. The logs showed the attempted unauthorized transfers from a remote server in Napa, tagged with Miles's digital signature. The detective looked at the logs, then at Graham, and finally at me. The suspicion in his eyes evaporated, replaced by confusion. "We were cleared in 10 minutes. They are desperate," Graham told me after the police left. "They know you are not just the furniture anymore. They are trying to destroy your credibility so you cannot testify." When Miles walked in an hour later, feigning shock at the police presence he had undoubtedly orchestrated, I didn't cry. I didn't ask him why. I stood in the center of the kitchen, steady as a stone. "The police are gone. Miles," I said. "My God, Mariah, what did you do?" he asked, his performance flawless. "Did you take the money? Is that why you have been acting so strange?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I have read everything, Miles, but I am still waiting for you to sign your own sentence." He blinked, the accusation bouncing off his arrogance. He didn't understand that I meant the data logs, not a diary. He thought I was talking about feelings. You are hysterical, he sneered, dropping the act. He reached into his briefcase and slammed a document onto the island counter. I am done playing nice. Sign this. I looked down. It was a property waiver, a document stating I relinquished all claims to the marital assets and the Dalton estate in exchange for a lump sum settlement of $200,000. Sign it, Miles demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Sign it, and you get peace. You get to walk away. If you don't, I will make sure the next police visit isn't a mistake. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling intentionally. I needed him to think he had won. I needed to stretch this out. I need to read it first. Give me tonight. You have until morning, he hissed. While he was threatening me in the kitchen, a transaction was clearing across town. Graham had authorized the transfer of $500,000 to the shell company Bryn had set up. We had cameras rolling in the lawyer's office where Bryn was waiting. She signed the receipt for the funds using a forged identity, confirming the wire fraud. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a single text from Graham Asset Secured. Trap is shut. I looked at Miles, who was pouring himself a drink, his hands shaking slightly. He was already mentally in Portugal. He didn't know that the walls had already closed in. We had 72 hours before the takedown, and he spent them packing a suitcase, while I spent them preparing to watch him burn. Tuesday morning began with a sound that made my skin crawl. Miles was whistling. He moved through the kitchen, pouring coffee and adjusting his silk tie with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he had outsmarted the world. He kissed me on the cheek, a dry, perfunctory gesture, and told me he would be home late because of a board meeting. He was lying. He was going to finalize the wire transfers that would fund his new life in Portugal. He walked out the door, believing he was days away from freedom, unaware he was walking directly into a cage. I did not cry. I went upstairs and put on the navy blue suit I had bought 3 years ago and never worn because Miles said it made me look too severe. I packed the divorce papers, the black moleskin notebook filled with dates and lies, and the digital evidence Graham had provided. I stood in the center of the bedroom, took a deep breath, and waited. At 9 o'clock, the burner phone in my pocket buzzed against my hip. I pulled it out. The screen displayed a single word from Graham. Now. Across the city, the trap snapped shut. I knew exactly what was happening because we had rehearsed the timeline. At Graham's corporate headquarters, Bryn was sitting in a conference room, pen in hand, signing a document to release another tranche of investment capital. She thought she was securing her future. Instead, the doors burst open. Federal agents and local detectives swarmed the room. She was arrested with the pen still in her hand, the ink wet on a fraudulent contract. At the same time, Miles was straightening his tie in the mirror of the hospital hallway, completely unaware that his partner had just been taken into custody. He checked his watch, smiling at his reflection, believing he was on his way to a victory lap at the emergency hearing regarding Evelyn's competency. He walked toward the conference room with the swagger of a man who thought he was untouchable, not realizing he was walking straight into an execution. The emergency hearing regarding Evelyn's medical competency was meant to be Miles's victory lap. His lawyer stood before the hospital ethics board and the judge, painting a tragic picture of a grandmother whose mind had been eroded by time. He argued that the shaky signature on the power of attorney document was simply the result of frailty, not forgery. He was eloquent, persuasive, and completely wrong. I walked into the room just as he finished his opening statement. I didn't apologize for the interruption. I walked straight to the evidence table and laid down the black moleskin notebook, the timeline of the Napa trip, and the digital recorder. Graham followed me in. He didn't offer emotional testimony. He offered cold, hard math. He projected a diagram of the financial hemorrhaging onto the screen, tracing the path of every stolen dollar from the charity fund to the shell companies. He played the surveillance footage from his office, showing Bryn accepting the $500,000 with a smile and a signature that wasn't hers. The room went silent. But the silence didn't last. I would like to speak. A voice rasped from the side of the room. Evelyn sat up in her wheelchair. She looked small, but her eyes were burning with a clarity that made Miles take a step back. "She is confused," Miles stammered, his sweat visible. "She doesn't know what is happening." "I know exactly what is happening." "Miles," Evelyn said, her voice gathering strength. "I played the fool because I needed to see who would try to rob the house while the lights were out. I heard you on the phone. I wrote it down. You said you needed to deal with this senile old woman." Miles turned the color of ash. The judge reviewed the handwriting samples I provided, comparing them to the power of attorney. It took less than 5 minutes for the ruling. The document was declared a forgery. The civil matter was immediately suspended, and the file was handed over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution involving medical document fraud. As the officers moved in, Miles turned to me. He looked desperate, his composure shattered, reaching out as if I were still the safety net he had used for a decade. "Mariah, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You know me. You know I just got in over my head. Tell them we can fix this." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. He wasn't a star. He was just a small, greedy man. "You didn't lose me today," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You lost me the day you turned love into a plan." Across the room, Bryn was being handcuffed. She started screaming, her poise disintegrating into hysteria. "It was him," she shrieked, pointing at Miles with her cuffed hands. "He told me the money was his I didn't know. It is all a misunderstanding." Graham stepped forward and held up a printout of their text messages. "This is a log of you coordinating the forgery timestamps. Bryn, there is no misunderstanding. It is conspiracy." The final blow came when the hospital attorney read the summary of Evelyn's actual will, which had been updated 6 months prior. Miles was explicitly disinherited. Control of the family trust was not going to him, nor would it sit stagnant. I was named as the sole executor, charged with the duty of liquidating the assets and transferring the funds to a list of charities Evelyn had chosen. Miles wasn't just going to prison, he was going broke. The police escorted Miles out into the hallway. A crowd of hospital staff, patients, and reporters had gathered, drawn by the commotion. It was a mirror image of the gala night. The flashbulbs popped, the crowd whispered, and Miles was the center of attention. But this time, the applause was replaced by the click of handcuffs. I stood in the doorway, watching him be led away. I wasn't in his shadow anymore. I was the one casting it. I went back to Evelyn's room one last time. She was tired, resting back against the pillows, but she reached out and squeezed my hand. We didn't need to say anything. She closed her eyes, finally able to rest without fear, and I walked out of the room. I stepped out of the hospital doors and into the afternoon sun. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet pavement and new beginnings. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely. I had walked into this marriage as a prop, but I was walking out as a woman who had rewritten her own ending. It wasn't about revenge in the end. It was about standing up, brushing off the dust, and finally, truly, living. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on Mariah's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.